Hello, and welcome to the Radiant Mission Podcast. My name is Rebecca Toomey, and I am here with my amazing co host and sister, Rachel Smith.
Hey, guys.
We're on a mission to encourage and inspire you as you're navigating through your life and with your relationship with Christ. And we are currently in a series called God's Design for Birth. And today, we're going to be talking about something really fun, and that is wild pregnancy. So, we're going to talk about what wild pregnancy is, how it's different from traditional pregnancy management, and how I became my own midwife for the birth of my third baby with wild pregnancy. So, it's an interesting one today.
Yeah,
We
gonna be
talked
wild.
It's going to be wild. Yeah. We talked a couple weeks ago about Rachel's birth of her third baby. And now that my baby is 7 months old, it's time to talk about the birth of my
I
third
think
baby.
my baby was 7 months old when we recorded my episode.
Yeah. So it's a theme, I guess. I guess it takes us 7 months to get around to talking about it. But here we are. Yeah, I had a wild pregnancy for Bryn, who's our
Rebecca,
third.
can you define for us what is wild pregnancy?
Well, I'm so glad you asked. What a great question. Really, a wild pregnancy is just a pregnancy that is really on your own terms. Most people, when they're pregnant with a baby, they do this thing called schedule an appointment. And it's either with an OBGYN or maybe it's with a midwife at an OBGYN's office, or maybe if you've been listening along, it's with a midwife or something of that effect at home or at a birthing center. Usually, women go places to have people check them for things. A wild pregnancy is none of that. A wild pregnancy means that you are not seeking prenatal care from a doctor or a midwife, that you are basically your own midwife and you are caring for your own pregnancy on your own terms. Simple enough, I guess. Right?
Yeah, so it's kind of like women in the birthing communities call it wild because it's like not wild like crazy, but like wild
Free.
as in
Wild and
like
free.
right, like saying like, "Oh, let's go pick wildflowers." Like wild as in they are just natural in a field. They weren't like, you know, rated in a garden. So
Sure. Yeah, that's
traditional birth might be, garden landscaped.
you mean pregnancy.
Right. Traditional pregnancy experience. But a wild pregnancy is like a field of wildflowers. Like there's
It is.
no landscaping.
There's no landscaping. It's completely free and open. And wild pregnancy does look different for different people. I'm in a number of different home birth groups, and some people have wild pregnancies and some don't. Some are kind of in between. And it doesn't always look the same for everybody. Some people that have a wild pregnancy, they don't do anything at all, meaning like they don't do any ultrasounds, they don't do pregnancy tests either, like they don't pee on a stick or in a cup and test it. They just rely entirely on their intuition for how their body is feeling throughout that pregnancy. So, someone who's having a wild pregnancy, like you're not going to catch them taking a glucose test, drinking that orange drink, or
It makes
what
me
other
think
things?
about like really just how women, have been giving birth for thousands of years.
You mean how women have been giving birth since the last 100 years? Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I mean, although I would say like at least for the pregnancy, births probably, historically were quote unquote wild.
Mhm.
But the birth, I think there is a historic tradition of having a birth keeper or a midwife. Like we even read about it in the Bible that women would come to support women when their birthing time began.
Sure. Sure. Which
But
we're
the
going to talk
pregnancy
about the
itself was
birth.
wild.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that next week with home birth and free birth and unassisted birth and those kinds of options and what people do in those scenarios and what I did. But I just made the decision when I got pregnant with Bryn that I was going to have a wild pregnancy. And of
And
course,
what
that was
inspired you to do that? I mean, I
well.
know, but I'm just asking for the sake of this podcast.
For those that want to listen back, I would definitely recommend listening back. I should have had this open to the early episodes of my story about Brooke and Brooke's birth and then Ben's birth, which was, I think it was episodes 8 and 9.
I'll look it up real quick.
And that was really the catalyst for a lot of things in my world when it came to birth and, of course, unassisted birth and all that good stuff. And coming out of my birth with Ben, who, again, be sure to listen back because I share
Yes,
how
it's 7, 8, and 9.
perfect. Thank you. 7, 8, and 9. I share the story of how, I had a very medicalized birth with my first, then went the opposite for Ben because the Lord was telling me to stay home. So I hired a home birth midwife. And I went through that whole process with her and I was meeting with her, very frequently and learning a lot and had a good relationship with her and everything like that. And I was also doing my own research to make sure that I wasn't taking my reliance on the system, which is what I did with my first, and just believing everything they said and like following what they wanted me to do. That second time, it was about me learning about the birth process and pregnancy and everything related to it, from my body to how the baby was growing and all that. And then at the end of my pregnancy with Ben, my midwife dropped me and I had that tough decision to make, which was, do I go back into the system or do I keep forging forward? And we made the decision to have an unassisted home birth. And it was amazing. It was awesome. And so being pregnant with Bryn, now my choice was, do I hire a midwife again or no? Because obviously I wasn't going back into the system. Like I was not going, there's no
Yeah.
way I'm going to go to a hospital to give birth at this point now that I have been freed from the system. So it's, do I hire a midwife or do I not hire a midwife? And not hiring one means that you're having a wild pregnancy, basically, because you're not
Right.
going in for
And it
care.
was really like, what's the point of hiring a midwife this time when your midwife last time failed you and you did perfectly fine? So it's like, why spend the
Yeah,
money?
exactly. Exactly. Because you have to look at, what does a midwife do?
Mm-hmm.
Midwives are there to support you. They're there to teach you things. They're there to be there for you throughout your pregnancy. And then they're going to show up when your baby's being born. And I didn't want anybody to show up when my baby
Yeah.
was being born because I've learned I like to birth alone. I like to it just be me and Mike and mom, and that's it. And my circle is small. And the thought of bringing in a midwife for my birth, it gave me a lot of anxiety because, like, what if they were scared, or what if they got nervous about something, or they didn't like the way that I was doing something, or they
Yeah,
couldn't
because
sit
it
on
was
their
like last
hands.
time the midwife was what really caused the drama for you. And you already were pretty well versed in your midwife options for your area.
Yep.
You had talked to a lot of them in your desperate hour of need, and nobody would be there to support you. I imagine if any of those midwives would have stepped up and actually attended Ben's birth, and everything would have gone exactly the same and they really wouldn't have had to do anything, then maybe you would have gone into this pregnancy of like, oh, I loved her, I want her there. Or maybe not, like, who
Yeah.
knows. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I
as
think
far
so
as like
too.
the support, your local support, you really didn't have any options and you knew of every option. So,
Yeah.
not
I
to say
agree.
like you chose this out of lack of options, like you chose it because it's what you wanted to do, but it's just part of the decision making thought process.
Totally. Just to give some listeners a background in case they haven't heard back on those episodes, there are only a couple of midwiferys in my town where I live. There's literally three. And there are more now, but all of them are trained by the people that have the ones now. And so I know them all and I know their mentality around birth. And when my midwife dropped me, I called the other two midwiferys in town to see if they would attend my birth. And both of them were like, no way, not sorry. Like, sorry, we can't help you, but it's too late in the game. We haven't built a relationship. Your case is pretty wild because I had a C-section
So
with
you belong with a wild pregnancy.
yeah, you don't belong with us. So I went it
You're a
alone and
curated garden.
yeah. So you're right. It's like I'm not going to go ask the women that rejected me from my second birth to
Yeah.
come here. And that was even if I wanted to have care, right? But you're right. All of the things that I've learned led me to this because
Right.
I felt very confident I didn't need to have someone monitoring my pregnancy. I was monitoring my own pregnancy.
Yeah.
And a lot of the big topic that women talk about when talking about wild pregnancy and free birth is this concept of following your intuition, following what your body is telling you and what the Lord is telling you, because God gave us an intuition. And that intuition is a sense that something is wrong or something needs to be addressed. And it's all about paying attention to our bodies because this is the thing. We outsource our intuition a lot of times when we are in the medical system because we're trusting that someone else knows better than us. When I was going to an OB with my first baby, I trusted that they knew everything, right? Like they knew best. If I needed to get an ultrasound, I needed to, get my urine tested or whatever it might be. They knew what was best for me, and I was going to just follow them and do what they told me to do. What I learned between then and my third pregnancy was how to follow my own intuition, my own body. What was it telling me? Is it telling me that you don't feel good? Something's not right? And now am I going to go jump to call somebody because something's not right and ask them what to do? Honestly, you guys, like every time I ever asked my OB a question, she was so clueless. I learned more from Google than I did from my OB. So it's kind of like, what? And now here's the thing, this is not about not taking care of yourself. It's not about doing nothing. It's about only doing what's needed. And it's also about learning from other women. And that's the coolest thing about all of this is like, I want to learn about pregnancy and birth from women that have done it, not from people that have read a textbook that are men also.
Yeah.
Because what do they know about being pregnant? You're not feeling what is going on inside of your body.
Right.
So I was in a lot of groups. I actually was in a group that was called Free Birth with Jesus. And it was a lot of women who already free birthed, and then some women who were going to, and some of them were assisted, some unassisted, some wild pregnancy, some not. But it was a place for us to come ask each other questions like, hey, I have some extra swelling. You know, what do you think about this? And kind of hearing, did you experience this? And listening to other women's experiences and learning from that. That to me was what wild pregnancy was about. Because I
Yeah.
knew I'm not going to go get 47 ultrasounds. That's not true. People don't get 47, but they do get many.
I
And I'm not,
probably had at least 12. No, not
12,
at least 9.
9
Yeah, with my
for each
first.
baby. Oh my
With
God.
my first and second. Yeah, they did one every single month.
Whoa, that seems like a lot.
Maybe even multiple times a month.
Wow.
I know. It is kind of crazy. And not to get into like the ultrasound thing, but there has been some evidence that has come out that they might not be as safe as we're told they are.
Yep.
Not saying that it's like super clear that they're definitely harmful, but
Oh,
they
that
just
actually is pretty clear because it changes the cells. the
Yeah,
longer that you're
essentially,
doing an
yeah,
ultrasound.
the waves actually like heat up the tissue inside the uterus. And so it's pretty crazy that I had that many. And I think a lot of people say like, oh, they're not that, obviously they're fine because my baby is fine, but
Yeah.
as a society, our rate of cancer and all these crazy things are so much higher. I'm not saying that ultrasounds are what is giving people cancer. Like, we really don't know, but
Mhm.
they're just not as
Not as safe as they're acting
right.
like
They
that
really
we've
should be
been told. Yeah.
right. They really should be something that is used sparingly. And like you said, some people choose not to have any at all. And for some people, it's weighing the pros and cons of having as limited as possible. I know I did that in my last pregnancy. I only had the 1 2 in the beginning, and then I did do an anatomy scan. And because to me it was really important to make sure the baby's position and all that, because I was concerned about breech. But since we're on the topic of ultrasound, how did you feel about ultrasound or not in your wild
Yeah.
pregnancy?
And just like you said, I don't know enough about the research to know exactly what the effects might be on an unborn baby as it's growing in the womb with ultrasound. But I know enough to know that there's no reason to overexpose if I don't need to. If it's not necessarily to expose the baby multiple times, then why do it? It's like, if you really think about it, it's for the mother
Yeah.
more than anything. And it's used as an intervention, it's used as a way to intercede in the medical world. That's how they convince these women to induce their babies, because they do an ultrasound. Oh, baby's too small or baby's too big. Let's induce. Oh, you don't have enough fluid or this or that. And it's all been proven that trying to figure those things out, weight of a baby, is totally inaccurate on from ultrasound. It's a guess. Same thing with fluid. There have been women that have been told, "Oh, you don't have enough fluid," which regenerates, by the way. You don't have enough fluid, and then they go to have the baby. The mom had plenty of fluid. So it's not a great tool for solving problems anyway. Maybe if someone had a concern about the placenta position or something like that, that's a more valid reason for getting an ultrasound. But I kind of went into this like, I'm not going to use modern technology unless it's necessary, because I've learned over the years, right? Like, birth is it's a naturally occurring event. It's not an emergency. And so if I don't have to use technology, I'm not going to. But I did do one ultrasound. So like I said, a lot of people that have a wild pregnancy, no ultrasounds at all. Most people, I would say, maybe some people will do one at the beginning. But mine was really more out of, I wanted to make sure that my dating was correct, because I work in the corporate world. I have to request maternity leave. Like, I can't just, if I was a stay-at-home mom, it probably wouldn't matter to me. And I'd be like, all right, whenever this baby shows up, like, it's all good. But I really wanted to make sure that I had a general idea of when this baby was going to come.
Right. And
Obviously, the baby's going to come.
the dating was confusing for you because you got pregnant so soon after your second was born, you hadn't got your cycle back. So that was the kind of confusion, because when you don't have your
Mhm.
period as a marker of pregnancy, then it really is like,
Yeah, it
you
was
know,
actually very confusing, because I got pregnant when Ben was like 3 months old, and then had a
mhm.
miscarriage. And then a couple months later, I got pregnant with Bryn, and I'd never gotten my period back. So I got pregnant twice with no period. So if you're listening and you think that lamb is an effective method for not getting pregnant,
What is
la-
lamb?
lactation,
Oh,
something method, I forget what the A stands for. Basically, they will say that if you're exclusively breastfeeding and you're breastfeeding around the clock or whatever, then you won't
Yeah, that's not birth
get
control.
pregnant. That is not true. Some people, yes, it does work for them. For me, it does. I still ovulate. I don't have a period, but I'm still ovulating. Like I'm not shedding.
Yeah,
So, just an interesting piece of this because I didn't have a period, but I knew I ovulated.
right.
And
So you
so
wanted
I
to get an
was
ultrasound to confirm the date that
exactly.
you guessed your
I wanted
ovulation,
to make sure it was accurate, right? Like,
which
I need,
is so funny to me because you were exactly accurate on the day because you guessed your
yes.
due date. Man, talk about intuition.
So that's the craziest part about this, right? And the other thing was that people were like, "You're huge. Are you sure it's not twins?" So I was like, "Well, let's see if there's twins in there."
Right,
I'd like
right.
to be prepared for twins. That could be a good thing to, I don't know. Now that I've gone through this and did this ultrasound, I don't know if I would do it again.
Yeah,
Every birth is a learning experience, right?
right.
So I um went to a, what do they call it? Like an elective ultrasound place.
Yeah,
It wasn't a medical center associated with a hospital or anything like that. It was
yeah.
one of
They're
those
like
places,
ultrasound clinics
yeah, like where you can go do the
or a
3D
boutique.
ones or whatever,
Yeah.
which I wasn't doing a 3D one, but I went, how far along was I? Do you remember? I think it
I
was like
think you
13
were
weeks.
like 11 weeks.
No, I had to be further because it was enough time that if I had done, well, maybe it was 11 or 12 weeks actually.
Yeah, I think it was 11 or 12 because I remember the tech gave a guess on the gender and you asked me what I thought and I said it's slightly too early because you can
Mhm.
guess pretty accurately at 12 weeks, 5 days. So I
It
think
was
you
it I think it was, for me, my calculations, I think it was that far.
yeah.
But what was interesting is when I went there, I told her my guest date and she put it in the computer and then it changed it from just typing it in the computer to like 2 days earlier, I think it was. And she was like, "Yeah, your due date is this." And I'm like, "Because you typed my date in the computer and your computer is telling you that that's the date, then that's how we're doing this." And that, I
But she
don't know,
did
I didn't.
measure the baby and did that change anything?
So then I basically told her what was going on, and I just wanted to make sure my dating was spot on, or my dating was accurate, at least within the same week or something, or close.
Right.
And so she was looking at the parts of the baby and being like, "Oh, the baby hasn't developed this yet, and it has this or whatever." I forget exactly what she specifically said, but she said something like, "You're close, but I think that it might be a little earlier than you think. Like you might be, 2 to 5 days earlier."
Yeah.
And so when I walked out of there, I was like, "I don't care what she says. I'm close enough." So my date is July 7th.
Right.
And then he was born on July 7th
Yeah.
on the day. So
Yeah.
because I think that she said I should change my date to the 9th, is I think what she said, or like the
Yeah.
10th or something. I think she said that my date should be 7/9 or 7/10 or something. And I was like, "No, I'm gonna go with 7/7." So the intuition was right, just like you said.
Yeah. Yeah.
And everything else was good. But then when I walked out of there, I did feel like, why did I do this? Because there wasn't two. Not that I really was that convinced. I wasn't convinced that there was two, but I definitely was way bigger than I have been. And my lines on my test were so dark. And sometimes I have a couple of people that a couple of friends that have twins, and they're like, "Oh, my lines were super dark. It's probably twins." And so just if you're listening, that means nothing. And the fact that I took pregnancy tests is another thing that a lot of wild pregnancy people don't do. So those were the two kind of medical technology type things that I did do during this pregnancy. I would say the other thing that I did that was considered medical is, we were talking about following your intuition. And so if I didn't feel right, I would address, what is it that's not feeling right? If I am feeling dehydrated or just not feeling good in general, just making sure that I'm getting enough of the beef liver that I was taking during pregnancy, making sure I'm getting minerals. I was taking trace minerals. I was taking fish oil. I'm very much like, I'm not a prenatal person. I never have been because I think that that's kind of a scam, but that's a whole other conversation. Um, and a lot of that stuff is so artificial and fake. What your body doesn't respond the same way to artificial chemical made vitamins or supplements than it does to the real thing. So trying to eat well, but then supplementing with real or food based supplements like beef liver, because sorry guys, but I just can't eat actual beef liver yet. Maybe one day when I'm stronger. So I tried to treat from that perspective, right? Like making it about whatever my body needed at that time. So towards the end of pregnancy, I got a ton of swelling, and like my feet were really swollen, and obviously that happens at the end of pregnancy. But I was my own midwife. I had to make sure that it wasn't preeclampsia or anything more serious. So I ended up getting a arm cuff to take my own blood pressure, and I had urine strips to test my own urine. So those are also considered medical things, medical testing. So some people might just follow their intuition with that and be like, I feel like my blood pressure is high and I'm going to do these things. So I could have probably bypassed that and done the same things that I did anyway, which was find ways to make sure that my blood pressure was healthy. It was slightly elevated, but not super concerning. And you had a lot of good tips for that too, because you were also pregnant and going through
Yeah.
some similar things, or you had just gone through it.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, it
My
was
my
just
my blood pressure got a little bit elevated at the end of mine too. And I swell like a balloon in all my pregnancies. And I actually had preeclampsia in my first pregnancy. So well, I had preeclampsia, whatever the heck that means. I don't even know if it was real. It was an excuse to get my baby out, I think is what it was. But that's beside
yeah.
the point. Anyway, I learned a lot. And so, yeah, like you said, just kind of listening to other women who've had, specific issues, like that's how we can all glean from each other. Not to say that there's anything wrong with listening to a doctor or midwife, that they, see a lot of things happening with their patients or their clients. But when you can glean information from women who've actually personally experienced something and what works from them. And for me, the end of my last pregnancy with my blood pressure just going a little bit high, my midwife is a herbalist, and so she had like, take this and this and this herb and do this, and so then I can pass that on to you. And
Yeah, exactly. And that's part of the whole community of this, right?
yeah.
Is learning from each other and learning from wise women like your midwife, who is an herbalist and knows how to naturally support healthy blood pressure through herbs.
Right.
And that was a
Yeah.
cool thing to learn about too. So, in all, what I'll say about wild pregnancy is it was awesome and I would do it again. It was way less stressful than it is to have a doctor or a midwife. Both of them have come with their own stresses because you have to get in your car and drive there. That's the thing that I like the least about the end of pregnancy when you have a care provider
Yeah.
is you have to drive there.
I
And
would
it's like
definitely
so
agree with that.
unsafe.
Even though I love my midwife, I was driving an hour and a half, and at the end, I'm like, gosh, I can't wait for the last time I have to do this drive.
Yeah.
And not only that, of like you saying that there's stressors that come along with it. Like I said, I love my midwife, and she was on my team, supportive the entire time. But I had like this underlying fear that I was going to get dropped at any moment and be sent to the hospital. And she wasn't giving any indication that she would do that. But I think because of what happened to you,
Yeah.
and
The
just
nerve
because I
goes in.
had little health things crop up, like high blood pressure, Like I was really saying at the end, I actually said to her multiple times, if my blood pressure ruins this birth I prepared for, and because in my mind it was like she was going to send me to the hospital, like it was like there was a stressor of something I was afraid of her doing, even though she probably never would have done it. I mean, maybe if there was like a serious health concern, but
Mhm.
anyway, I get what you mean, that there is kind of a stressor, but when
Yeah,
you're using your own tuition and listening to your own body, you would make a decision for yourself if a serious health concern came up,
exactly.
but you didn't have
Exactly.
any
Like if I
you
was
didn't have anyone
falling
else
apart,
breathing down your neck to do
sure.
that to you.
Yeah, if I was falling apart, things were not going good, and like I was really sick and had a lot of problems, then that would be a reason for me to seek help from somebody that could help me. I'll tell you, it wouldn't be a doctor, it would be a midwife. But, and that was the other thing is like I've met birth keepers, I guess you could use that term, which are unlicensed midwives. And even somebody that you and I both know that I'm not going to name, who offered to be there for me for support if I ever needed anything or ever wanted to, have any testing done or anything like that. So
Yeah.
like I had that available if I needed it. But
Yeah.
this was really about another test of faith for me, right? Like
Right.
having an unassisted birth was the biggest act of faith and trust in the Lord and trust in his body, or trust in the body that he created for me, this vessel that
Yeah.
I'm living in. And having a wild pregnancy was just another extension of that for me. It was, you know what? I trusted him to guide us through the birth of Ben. And now I'm going to trust that my body's healthy and I'm going to be able to get through this pregnancy. Oh man, I should mention this. I'm also considered geriatric, you guys. I am of advanced maternal age, meaning over 35.
Yeah.
And most people would be like, oh my God, you're old and not going to the doctor. But I think that's even more of a reason not to, because you're so pathologized as
Yeah.
is. But then for women over 35, they're treated like, oh, you need to have more ultrasounds, you need to have more tests, we need to check you extra to make sure. And it's like, make sure of what? None of this stuff is really necessary. So,
I
for,
had I heard someone say recently that over 32 was geriatric. I'm like,
oh
what?
man.
No, it's not.
Oh no. Well, they're probably changing it because they need more reasons to run more tests and do more things. And if I've learned anything, especially from the women in my community who are giving birth at home, I know multiple women, many that are over 40 and having home births unassisted. Some of them have had midwives in the past, and they're like, I know I can do this. I know my body can do this. There's nothing
Yeah.
wrong with me. So I hope that this is encouraging to someone out there that, there's a lot of stuff that we just don't need during pregnancy. And I wanted to be able to enjoy a pregnancy for once and not be driven by scare tactics. But also, like you said, I also had a lack of resources anyway. And after my previous experience, it really led down this path. But there's one piece I haven't mentioned yet that I want to mention real quick, that this was the first pregnancy so far that I didn't know the baby's gender
Hmm.
until birth. Because, like you said, I was at the cusp of being able to use whatever that's called,
The nub
what
theory.
the nub theory, to know if it was a boy or a girl.
Yeah, the one ultrasound you had.
And I think it was kind of by design. And then remember, I came out of that, and the ultrasound shots that we had were so terrible, like
Yeah.
couldn't really tell.
Yeah.
Like they weren't good enough to even use nub
It wasn't
theory.
clear in that area. Yeah.
And I kind of felt like that was the Lord being like, stop trying to do things that
Mhm.
I'm telling you not to do, or, that you're being led down this road. Like, stop trying to figure this out. Because I'll tell you, I wanted so badly to post those ultrasound pictures in one of those nub groups and see what people had to say, but I never did it because I'm like, I have to get out. I have to get out of this stuff. I have to get out of that mindset. Now, of course, I was looking at it going like, I think it's a girl, but like it's early girl and this could turn into a boy.
Well,
next
and
week.
I used to swear by the nub theory, and then I went to a gender ultrasound place with my second just for the nub theory to find out his gender, because that's how I found out my first was a boy, and they were right. And I went to the same place, and I had a tech who had never once been wrong, and she'd been doing this specifically for like 3 years. And she said 100% without a doubt it was a girl. It was a girl nub. And so I had a son already, and I say that this was the 2 weeks that I had a daughter, but then it didn't sit right with me. Like, I wanted confirmation, and I went back, and the owner of the place was there, and she's like, no, I get it. People want confirmation. And she put it on the screen, and within seconds we saw the little peener. And so I was like, and she told me not to tell her what the other girl said. And then I was like, oh my gosh, wow. She's like, what did the other tech say? And I said, she said it was a girl. And she went and brought up her shots. She's like, I don't know why she would say this is a girl. This is clearly a boy right here. She's like, this is crazy. She's never been wrong before. I'm like, anyway, all that to say was that I don't put a lot of faith in the nub theory stuff anymore.
Yeah, right.
Especially when it's a girl,
It's
because it's
but
harder to
it's
tell.
also yeah, and it's also human beings trying to take guesses out what they're seeing in
Yeah,
this
on a blurry
crazy
screen.
ultrasound magnet technology that they're using to take a picture inside of your body. Kind of crazy
Isn't
when
it
you think
radio
about it.
waves? I think it's radio waves. I don't remember. Anyways,
Well, I didn't know until she was born. Everybody knows by now that it's a girl
yeah.
baby. And I think towards the end, I honestly didn't really know either way what she was going to be, but towards the end I was really feeling like it was a girl just because I don't know, I just had like an
Is
intuition
that
about it.
intuition?
Yeah, I just had an intuition that it was a girl,
Which
going to
is
be a
funny
girl.
because I feel like the theme of this episode is really intuition. And I was going to say early on, I feel like I have terrible pregnancy intuition. I have 3 boys, and every single one of them I was convinced was a girl. So my pregnancy intuition is not good.
Yeah, right? Yeah, I don't know. And Brooke really was like praying that God would give her a sister, so maybe that's what really did it. Maybe God heard her prayers beforehand and
Well,
I don't know.
Everett prayed every single day that he would get a baby
Oh,
sister.
that's
So what
right.
happened there then?
Yeah, right. So yeah, it was that was a crazy part of it though. Which we'll share more on the next episode because we're going to talk about that birth experience and so what happened when I went from having a wild pregnancy to a wild birth.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that next week. Anything else you think we should share on this speed of maternal care?
I guess the one other question I had for, just the pregnancy aspect of your wild birth is, in general, like, what was your mental state? Like, how did you feel, from the beginning to the end of emotionally and mentally?
That's a good question. I think I went back and forth a lot. It's almost hard to remember because it feels like it was a lifetime ago, even though it was just a year ago that I was
Yeah.
pregnant, right? But I had moments where I was really nervous, more about the birth. I think I was the most concerned about going having another birth than I was about the pregnancy part of it. Towards the end, I definitely was trying to make sure I was staying on top of the swelling and that it wasn't going to lead to preeclampsia or anything like that. So as soon as I found that I started to experience that, I immediately cut any caffeine, which I'm not a big caffeine drinker anyway, but I like to drink a dirty chai latte every now and again. And I was done. No caffeine. And completely was very focused on having a good diet. I was drinking herbal teas. I was taking like beetroot is another healthy heart helps you with your blood pressure. There was something else I was taking. I forgot what it was. But just I was trying to do all the right things because I wanted to make sure that I had a healthy birth. I will say that physically, the end was very challenging. I experienced a lot of SPD this time. symphysis pubis dysfunction, and that occurs during pregnancy when your pelvic joints become stiff or they're not moving evenly. And it really kind of feels like a like girdle pain is what they say, like pelvic pain. And it doesn't hurt the baby, but it's pretty painful or uncomfortable for the mom. Like when you're walking, it's basically like you feel this pain in your pubic bone kind of area. And I was
Mhm.
going to the chiropractor because I swear by chiropractic care. It's very good for keeping things in alignment. But I definitely struggled physically towards the end. And I'll say that I found something that really helped me a lot, and that was a peanut ball. And that was actually something that I learned from your birth. Your midwives and your doula used a peanut ball to have you, and I kind of knew this previously too, but your birth kind of reconfirmed it for me, that there's certain positions that you can get into with your legs between a peanut ball that help to open your cervix up and release pressure on your hips. And so I bought a peanut ball on Amazon, and instead of sleeping with pillows between my legs, because I was only sleeping on my left side, and if I had to roll to my right for a little bit, I did, but I didn't sleep on my back at all. I only slept on my left side at the end. And I had pillows between my legs to kind of support my hips because I was experiencing a lot of pelvic pain if I didn't do that. But it just wasn't enough. So when I started sleeping with this peanut ball between my legs, that was a game changer. It released all the pressure that my hips had like stacking on each other and on that pubic bone. And it just, because it kind of like allows you to naturally separate in
Yeah.
between your legs. And that helped me a lot. And it also opened up my cervix. I could feel my cervix dilating. I know what it feels like for my cervix to be dilated now, which is kind of a crazy thing. It's not something that you would think that you could ever feel, but
Mhm.
now I know what it feels like. And that was kind of a cool
Pretty
thing
cool.
in this process of learning, right? Like something new.
Was the peanut ball as big as the one that I used in my labor? Was it that size or
Um,
was it smaller?
it was pretty big. I forget what size it is, but I looked online to see what size for my height and everything I
Mhm.
should get, and that's what I got. But it was big. I'm like sleeping with it between my legs, and
That,
my legs were like up in the
that's
air. It
that's why I
was
asked.
hard to get a blanket over it.
Yeah, that's why I asked because obviously I didn't know about this in my pregnancy, but I had a hard time sleeping on my left side because of the hip pain
Mhm.
or just staying on one side. I would switch sides because of that. And you're right. Like I would always sleep with pillows between my leg, but they squish.
Yep.
And my only experience with a peanut ball was in labor, and that thing
Hmm.
is massive. So that's why I asked of
It
like
was
how
massive.
sleeping with such a big thing every night was.
It was totally massive, but I somehow managed to get the blanket over all of that. I'd get all situated, and then I'd ask Mike to get the covers over me. But it made such a difference. It made me feel so much more comfortable. And then I would say mentally, I went back and forth, right? Like there was times where I was nervous and afraid of, again, it was more about the labor, birth than it was about being pregnant. I felt very confident in being pregnant, and that part of it I wasn't too concerned about. But this was another test of faith. I had to
Yeah.
really put my faith in the Lord through the pregnancy process, but then trusting that going into birth, things would be okay.
Yeah.
I did have to do some kind of mental fear clearing towards the last, I would say, a couple of weeks to try to resolve that for myself. Just addressing the fears that I had and then saying, like, these are irrational fears because I had such a smooth birth with Ben. My biggest fear was that it wasn't going to go that way, right? Like I was
Right.
going to have, shoulder dystocia or something that was going to slow it down. And then that was worrying me that I was going to freak out.
An asynclitic head and have to push for 3 hours because you just watched me do that.
Or
I'm just
that.
kidding.
Yeah, exactly.
Kidding.
I was very nervous about the baby's position, but
I
I'll tell you,
remember,
sleeping
yeah,
with that peanut ball, I was fine.
yeah, I remember worrying for you that being at my birth not that it was traumatic, but as a pregnant woman, a very pregnant woman at my birth, it was like, you know, not fun to see some
You
parts,
know,
but
that's actually a really good point worth talking about is that it being there and going through that experience, of course, I was like 33 weeks pregnant or something. So I was
yeah.
pretty far along. It made me realize and be more understanding towards what midwives and doulas go through
Mhm.
because it's easy for us to be like, "Oh, they have fear and they shouldn't have any fear." But when you have had a bad experience, it can sit with you if you don't process it. So
Yeah.
if you're a doula or you're a midwife and you watch someone go through something really hard and really challenging and maybe they ended up transferring to the hospital and having a C-section after 3 days, that type of situation. I think that it can be very traumatic and something that a woman will carry with her that could create some additional fear around birth. But what's important to remember is not every experience is going to be the same. If you
Yeah.
experience an emergency with one person, that doesn't mean the next person the same problem is going to happen with them.
Right.
And so I think that that's where it's important that we all address our own fears about the experiences or things that we see or are a part of. And it was kind of twofold for me with your birth. Watching you give birth to an asynclitic baby was kind of almost resolving for me in comparison to my first birth, which was the same situation, except I was at the hospital. So they C-sectioned me.
Yeah.
And so it was very almost like full circle to
Right.
watch you give birth naturally to
Yeah.
a baby in the same position. And then at the same time, I'm like, man, I hope my baby's not asynclitic.
I know.
But that again is why I just leaned on the Lord and really prayed, like, Lord,
Remember, we
please,
asked my
please.
midwife too, like, what can you do
Mm,
to prevent asynclitic? Because none of
yes,
us were expecting that with me. And they said, you can go to the chiropractor. Didn't they say the peanut ball? No, they said stay on your left side, chiropractor, and pray. That's what they said.
I did all those things for
Yes,
sure.
exactly.
I think she did say, sleep with some pillows in between your legs or something like
Yeah.
that.
But she said stay on your left side. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. And
Well, it worked. It was
it did.
successful.
Yes. And thank the Lord.
Thank the Lord. So
Because
if
yeah,
you,
with your just going into that, I could totally see it. That's just why I asked about if being at my birth like affected you in that headspace a little bit, because both of us are kind of the mentality that when you're especially in the late stages of pregnancy, to really avoid birth trauma, even stories.
yeah, yep.
So, you know, because like you said, you have to connect that hearing or seeing something that happened to someone else isn't your own reality, and it's not going to be your own reality.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to work that out in your own head, because there is just this pressure that we put on ourselves and that society puts on us, that all the things that can go wrong in birth.
Hmm.
And the thing is that I've heard this talked about with birth workers, whether they're, oh, and actually kind of in the more natural world, that birth is like nature. It's not necessarily kind,
Hmm.
in that anything can happen. And that could be positive or negative. Sometimes the worst things can happen. It's not that you expect it, but you respect it. You respect that birth is a life altering event. Yeah, exactly. It's wild. That's perfect. Birth is wild.
Birth is
So,
wild.
yeah.
So
So,
why not wild pregnancy it up?
exactly. But you trust in the Lord and you trust your body. And you know what? Even when not everything goes perfectly, like a picture perfect birth, it's still the wildness of it all still can be beautiful, and it should be respected. So,
Yeah, definitely. One last thing I'll leave with before we wrap up for today is I did learn something else, and that is something that I'm currently trying to need to be more diligent about. Is that I think that I actually have some, what is the word? Some diastasis recti ab separation from my previous births. And that was the reason why my stomach was so low. Because I
oh
was
yeah,
super low, if you remember, with
yeah,
Bryn, like
hmm,
from the beginning, hanging down. And after having her and starting to read more on ab separation and all that kind of stuff, I think that is what the issue is. Because I still have that now, 7 months postpartum. I still have a very like low hanging stomach. And that's an indicator of ab separation. So it's all about learning, and it's all about learning, but then what am I going to do about it, right? Like, am I just going to ignore this forever? Maybe. No, I'm just kidding. Ugh, I bought a program that I need to start for the
yeah,
last 2 months. 2 months ago, I bought it. And I'm like, I need to do it. But I just keep putting it off. So this is my note to self that I need to start working on that, because that's the next piece, the next thing that I need to
yeah,
care for with my own body. Because I'm
yeah,
the only one who can, right? This is
right.
like I'm the only person in this body that could do
Now you
anything
are.
about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, now I am. Well, Bryn couldn't help me out with that. She's made it worse.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for talking about wild pregnancy with me. Next week, we're
Yeah.
going to talk
Thanks for
about
sharing
wild
your
birth.
story and your wisdom and experience.
Of course, anytime. Happy to share. And thank you all for tuning in and for being on this journey with us. If you would like to follow along outside the podcast, join the mission on Instagram or Facebook at The Radiant Mission. And if you're not already watching in video format, you can do so on YouTube. And today we're going to close with Joshua 1, verse 9. Have I not commanded you? Be strong and courageous. Do not be frightened and do not be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. And we're wishing you a radiant week, and we'll see you next time.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.